Yo, what is up guys? Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. So, a huge domestic fight has been announced for the 8th of October. That fight being Chris Eubank Jr. versus Benn. The fight goes down at the O2 Arena in London, and it will be on the DAZN pay-per-view. No doubt about it now, there's a lot of different takes surrounding this fight. I'll let you know mine in a second, but one thing we can't doubt here is that this is a massive fight. Having said that, just because it's a big fight, just because, people are going to get interested, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a great fight. Now, this fight's going to do well for a whole host of reasons. Number one, nostalgia is one of the best selling points to any product. I mean, we see that in today's society with video games, movies, etc. They will, remake old classic movies and, people will rush to see them no matter what. And I think that's going to be similar in regards to this fight. This fight will actually attract the casual, not only young casuals like me and you, or most people watching this video, but, the casuals who are in their mid-50s, who remember Nigel Benn versus Chris Eubank, both fights back in the 90s when they was in their youth, and this fight will trigger those memories, and there's no doubt that that's going to get a lot of people interested, just based on nostalgia. And when it comes to the younger generation, both guys are big names in the UK on social media, etc. Obviously even us younger folk are aware of the backstory between the Benns and the Eubanks. So in terms of storyline and all that nonsense, selling points, it's got a lot of that going for it, right? There's no doubt about that. You'll be a fool to deny that. But is it a good fight? Now, this fight is taking place at a catch weight of 156 pounds. Is there a rehydration clause? Your guess is as good as mine. Now, listen, to me at least, the only way this fight is competitive or risky on Eubank's behalf is that weight issue. Will making that weight affect Chris Eubank Jr.? Bear in mind, Chris Eubank Jr. has fought at super middleweight before, 168, whereas this fight is at 156. I know Chris Eubank Jr. primarily weighs in at 160. He has in recent years, but 4 pounds, taking 4 pounds off from middleweight is quite a big drop, and it could be significant. If you look at Eubank Jr. on the scales, he's not a small middleweight, and he doesn't really carry any extra fat or anything like that, so potentially he's going to be having to dehydrate himself further, maybe burn off some muscle to make the weight, and obviously, as we know, that can affect performance. But the main thing for me, though, is whether this fight has a rehydration clause. That has to be taken into account when we talk about this fight. However, if Chris Eubank Jr. isn't drastically affected by the weight, and he still has the same sort of speed, the same sort of stamina, strength, power, etc. that he would have at middleweight, then this fight, in my opinion, is a mismatch. Forget about the storyline going in, forget about the bright lights, forget about the dads, going back and forth. If Eubank Jr. is anywhere close to being optimal, he wins this fight easily, as far as I'm concerned. He's taller, he's longer, he's bigger, he's more experienced, he's fought better competition. I would say, just based on weight alone, he will be the harder puncher. He will be the stronger man. And I wonder, how does Benn go about this fight? What sort of game plan is he going to try and devise to beat Chris Eubank Jr.? Will he try to be boxing on the back foot and picking up points that way, play a boxing game with Eubank Jr.? I don't believe he's got the physical attributes to do so. He's shorter, his reach isn't as long, and in my opinion, he doesn't really fight well in that style anyway. I don't really believe Benn is all that great backing up. I think primarily he is best coming forwards. So Benn playing the boxing game, going jab for jab with Eubank Jr., not convinced that that is a great idea. Not that Eubank Jr. is a great boxer, he's not by any means. We've seen that against Billy Joe Saunders and George Groves, but Benn is not those guys. His skill set on the outside is nowhere near the level of a George Groves or a Billy Joe Saunders. Doesn't have the distance control, doesn't have the movement, the footwork, or, you know, the physical attributes that those guys had. So the boxing thing for Conor Benn, I don't see that working. The way I envisage Conor Benn fighting this one will be to fight in somewhat of an ambush style, because again, one thing about Eubank Jr., when somebody's standing in front of him, he can light you up. He can be very dangerous, and he'll really rattle through those combinations in the pocket, the uppercuts through the middle, the left hook around the side, the short overhand right, etc. He'll put those shots together really well. I wonder whether Conor Benn in this one will try to fight as like an ambush type of fighter. Maybe try to come in low, utilise a lot of head movement, double jab his way in. Be careful of that counter left hook of Eubank Jr. He's got a nice quick counter left hook. Try to evade that, close the gap, get inside, 2 or 3 punch combination. Don't overstay your welcome, and then basically get out, rinse and repeat kind of thing. Essentially fight in bursts. You know, picking his moments, when to strike, when to sit back, you know, that sort of thing. Because if he stays in the pocket with Eubank Jr., I just think Eubank's going to chew him up and spit him out, basically, you know. I think he'll be too strong, too powerful for Conor Benn. In fact, I know it sounds crazy, but what I would suggest that Conor Benn does is actually watch Mike Tyson. He's the shorter man in this fight. He is athletically gifted, Conor Benn, and he is somewhat explosive. Now, he can't replicate Mike Tyson like Mike Tyson, but I think a similar sort of style could be beneficial for him in this fight. But not Mike Tyson in the first sort of 2 or 3 rounds, where Mike Tyson was super aggressive and super like, you know, he'll be on your chest. But if you look at Mike Tyson fights after like the 2nd and 3rd round, if he never got those guys out of there, he would then basically start to fight in bursts. So he'll do his thing, you know, he'll slip the straight shots, he'll get underneath, roll with shots, head movement, get to the inside, close the distance. He'll throw a combination, maybe a 3 or 4 punch combination, and that was basically it, you know. That was basically it. Then his opponents would kind of get out, he would reset, and he would resume. I think that's the sort of approach that Conor Benn needs to take in this fight. Being the all-out aggressor, I think, will lead to him getting knocked out. I don't think he's got the boxing skills, nor the attributes, to box with Eubank Jr. from long range. I think he needs to approach this one in a relatively aggressive fashion, but he needs to be very, very cautious of when he attacks, when he holds back, and he needs to, one thing is paramount, he can't afford to sit in the pocket for too long in this fight. Whereas if you look at Chris Eubank Jr., again, this is all weight dependent, providing weight doesn't affect him. I think there's a few different ways he can win this fight. I think Chris Eubank Jr. can win this fight based on the jab, backing up, utilising that height and reach advantage. I think he can win that fight this way. Also, I could see Chris Eubank Jr. reverting to type and being much more aggressive like he was against the likes of Nick Blackwell, etc. And I think he can win the fight that way. Just deploy a high guard and try to walk Conor Benn down. You know, drag him into sort of a firefight. And if that happens, I've got Eubank Jr. Eubank Jr. should win this fight. The only factor for me that has to be considered here is the weight. One good thing about Eubank Jr. is he doesn't blow up outside of training camp. He always keeps himself in shape. So maybe this sort of weight cut, this sort of catch weight, won't affect Chris Eubank Jr. like it would other fighters, you know, who blow up and get big when they're not fighting. But you know, the fight's a weird one. It's a big fight. It's going to generate a lot of interest. But honestly, if Eubank Jr. is anywhere near his best, I mean, he'll win this fight comfortably. It's just that simple, as far as I'm concerned. And yeah, I mean, if it was a good fight based on merit, based on skill, based on them being evenly matched, I mean, a catch weight wouldn't be needed in the first place, right? That goes to show that, you know, both guys healthy, both guys fit, Eubank Jr. wins this fight comfortably. So the catch weight in itself is kind of a sign that, you know, theoretically this fight should be one-sided, you know, if both guys are fully fit. You know, I'm not a big fan of catch weights in general. There's the odd occasion where it can work, but I'm not a big fan in general, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, it is what it is. Listen, I'll look at the build-up. I will maybe make a couple of videos on it here and there. I'll try and enjoy it for what it is, but I'm not expecting like a barn burn. I'm not expecting a barn burner or an instant classic or anything like that. And also, you got to think as well. I mean, this is a big money fight for both men, but in terms of like career progression, where does this take either guy, especially Eubank Jr.? He's been saying now for 2 years, every time I've heard this guy speak, next fight's got to be a world title, next fight's got to be a world title, but here we are 2 years later, still no closer. And as for Conor Benn, I think he's going to get squashed, more than likely, so he gets smashed up at middleweight or at a catchweight. Then what, he goes back down to welterweight like nothing happened? And he's going to be softly matched again? Where's Conor's career going to go after this fight if he loses? And should he win, then what? Does he stay? Does he go to middleweight? Does he go to 154? Or back down to welterweight? I mean, who knows? Who knows? But, you know, the only winner here really, or potential winner, is Conor Benn, because Eubank, no matter what he does, is going to get no credit for winning this fight. Whereas Conor Benn, he could lose this fight and be somewhat competitive, and we'll hear the narrative, he was daring to be great, he didn't lose anything, he was going up in weight, etc. And then he'll go back down to welterweight. And if he somehow wins this fight, obviously that's huge. So the only winner here, or the only potential winner here, is Conor Benn. It does nothing for Eubank, in my opinion, apart from being a big payday. But yeah, a little bit of a cynical fight. It's not really happened at a natural time, but that's boxing for you. It is what it is. Share your thoughts below. It's been your guy Delboy. Peace.